Welcome to the World Cup Mood Board. I'm Jarrod Kimber, here for 99.94. Let's roll the bumper. England are alive! Sorry, I just really wanted to say that. In this tournament, if nothing else, they continue to survive, and they obviously now got a bit of a help from Mukunda yesterday, but today was all their own doing. They didn't quite bat New Zealand out of the game, but they took down the power play fairly well. And despite not losing too many wickets, they probably didn't kick on the way that they would have liked to. But their bowlers, and maybe just as importantly, their fielders, completely backed them up. It certainly wasn't perfect. They would have liked more runs in the middle, a touch more net run rate assistance when they were in front. And Moeen Ali would probably be thinking about that catch of Glenn Phillips for a long time. But they won. Right. This wasn't a 200-run total, the sort of totals that England score that knock other teams out. They weren't massively above par. If they were above par at all, realistically, they were slightly above par. But I think from their perspective, everyone got out there to have a bat. They used a good collection of bowlers. And while they were always in front, there was probably enough pressure on them that it kept feeling like a proper game, even as they were in charge of it. Also, I think they just read the game well. We've talked quite a bit about this sort of stuff so far. Against Ireland, they didn't read the game particularly well. And that's one thing about this tournament is turning up at each different ground and having to reevaluate everything. You can see that their fielding positions, they really thought about specific plans for the batters, but were still factoring in the big boundary sides. I thought their paces took the speed off the ball better than the New Zealanders did, other than Mark Wood, who doesn't seem to really need to worry about that. I thought they played the matchups well, which is something that I suppose Jos Buttler hasn't really shown that much with his captaincy so far. So obviously, they're still in the tournament and all that jazz, but I think this was a pretty good workout game for them as well. So there was certainly a lot to like from that perspective. Let's move on to Jos Buttler, who certainly had some luck. He was fumbled by Kane Williamson. You can see there, Williamson actually thought he'd caught that. I saw some people online saying things like, I thought he was supposed to be a good guy. Look at where his eyes were. Like at that stage, they look down, but when he actually drops it, he's looking this way. It's very rare that the player involved can actually see. Sometimes they can feel where the ball is, but they can very rarely see. He's diving and everything else is happening. So that was a bit remarkable. But yeah, they dropped Buttler twice, so that certainly helped him. Buttler made 18 about run a ball against Afghanistan. Made a second ball duck against Ireland. Hadn't played much against Pakistan. I don't think anyone was saying he was out of form. He just wasn't in form, if that made sense. He hadn't batted enough at that stage. And given the success of New Zealand bowlers so far in this tournament, England needed a pretty good start. And Buttler and Hales really did that. It was Hales that probably, I think Buttler might have even mentioned this afterwards, Hales took the pressure off him a little bit by going a little bit harder at the start. Buttler just sort of let Hales get off to that good start, and then it was later on when he moved up into the other gear when he felt like he had to. So the drops, he was dropped in the 6th over by that Williamson catch, and I'm trying to remember where the other drop was as well. And there was another there was another drop later on as well. Was it Ferguson? Just trying to see here. So when he was dropped originally, Buttler was on 8, and then Mitchell dropped. Oh, that's right. That was the sitter out on the boundary. Buttler had got 40 at that point. He went on to make 73. So both of the best players or best batters in this game were dropped, or the highest run scorers in this game were dropped. So there was certainly the bit of that on both sides. I thought that he measured his innings quite well. When Hales was going, he didn't need to go. When Hales went out, he did. Probably just didn't quite explode the way that he wanted to. But this is a sort of a Jos Buttler style anchor innings, since everything is now an anchor, as we've talked about before. But I think that he made sure that they got a very good total there, and then he tried to make it quite supersized towards the end. England in the field, obviously everyone knows that it's not their strength, bowling, especially now that two of their frontline bowlers are not available. But I thought they were pretty impressive today. They kept themselves in front of the game all the way through. They went, as I said, with the boundaries. They went with matchups. The pace bowlers went off pace. They gave Liam Livingstone the extra overs, all those sorts of things. And Moeen Ali bowling first up. Also, what's going on with Devon Conway? He should have been out to Moeen Ali today as well. He's gone from having the best record against off spinners to literally not being able to play them within a week. Adil Rashid bowled inside the power play. So again, I thought they were playing quite well with that. Chris Wokes, after what happened against Ireland, certainly bowled a lot better. When Mitchell was out there, that was probably the last sort of recognised batter that could put a big dent in England's hopes of winning that game, and he took that wicket as well. Plus, he got Conway out earlier. Mark Wood, I'll just see a note from Charlie that says the other Worcestershire Daryl Mitchell was also at the ground today. For those who don't know, there's dueling Daryl Mitchells in world cricket, which always used to confuse me when I used to look at the stats. It's like Mohammad Nawaz is like Mohammad Nawaz number 3, I think, in some places. And there's another one as well. I think Mohammad Irfan might be like one of 4 Mohammad Irfans. Players should be banned right across the game from having the same names as each other. Mark Wood bowled with very quick again. He got to 96 miles per hour. Although I think he was a good but expensive probably at times in his first couple of overs. But I think this is probably a pitch where he should have bowled more cutters. And I know that's not his thing, but I think even for him, occasionally, he should be looking for a couple of cutters. But I think a lot of the mistakes were he just couldn't get the line quite right to Williamson. And it's interesting that Williamson looks at his absolute best when he's facing a bowler who's making mistakes rather than bowlers who are putting the ball genuinely in the right area. He can't force those mistakes, but there's plenty of Williamson to come, don't worry. But yes, he was, I think when Wood's third over went for 3 runs when New Zealand needed 57 from 30, and he got the wicket of Neesham. It was quite clear that Neesham wasn't that comfortable with the pace. It might have been the combination of the pace and the boundary, if we're being honest, and where it was. I think he got a 2 early on in that over, and I did think to myself, it would be better for New Zealand if he wasn't on strike for the next couple of balls here. And sadly, he went out not long after that. So at the end of that over, New Zealand needed 54 from 24. And if you throw in Sam Curran, I think there's a question about him for later, so I'll come to that later on. But I think there's, if you throw in Sam Curran, he took 2 for 26. Also, again, where, we're seeing him sort of not really used as new ball specialist, we're seeing him in this other role. So far in this tournament, I think he's bowled pretty well in that role. All things considered. But the other thing I just wanted to mention was England's fielding. I think there was a bunch of times when, especially when Williamson and Phillips were stealing seconds and third runs and looking for everything, where they weren't getting many boundaries. And a couple of times there was balls that were going towards the boundary that England just managed to pull back. And you get those ones where it's 50-50 and you don't blame the fielder if they don't get it. But today it just felt like England got almost all of those. There were 2 massive errors that I saw. The first one was obviously the Moeen Ali drop. And the other one was there was a ball hit out to square leg at one stage and no one came in for it. And so they ran 2. But it's like no one picked it up. And it could have just been one of those fluke events. But you could see Ben Stokes running in from the offside, looking at everyone as if to say, what's going on? But overall, I thought England were exceptional in the field. All right, we're just going to take a short break here. And then after the break, we'll get to some of New Zealand's game. And then the other game altogether, I should say.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
Welcome back. Should we get to Kane Williamson? There's a lot here to discuss. I think I'm not going to bury the lead because I've put, I haven't. Muku has put his face on an anchor. I did the other stuff here. Muku put the face on the anchor because I asked him to, but still. This has obviously been a World Cup of the anchor. We've seen some very odd innings helping teams at different times so far. Some of those have been very dependent on conditions. Then you've had players like Aaron Finch who've just struggled for form, Shan Masood who are just sort of naturally going to be slower. This one was on a thrice used pitch. Thrice is a great word, isn't it? So it was always going to have to be a little bit better for spinners and a little bit better for people bowling cutters, and it was going to be hard to get away. So I think that with that in mind, you really want to stay slightly ahead of the rate on that kind of a pitch, because as the ball loses its hardness, it should be harder to hit boundaries. And I think if you look at England's innings and then New Zealand's innings, those things sort of played out a little bit. Look at Phillips is a very good example of just sort of struggling as the ball started to get softer. With that in mind, we're going to have to talk a lot about Kane Williamson here, aren't we? So let's start here. So on the left, we have runs made. So Kane Williamson made 26.3% of the runs of New Zealand today. And on the right, we have balls used. He used 33.3% of the legal deliveries. So he is negative when it comes to efficiency. Don't think that's going to shock anyone. He made 40 from 40 balls. And if you look at the difference between him and Phillips made 40.8% of the runs, and he faced 30% of the balls. So he made a lot more runs than he made 28 more runs, in fact, than Williamson while facing 4 less balls. That's not ideal, and I think this roughly shows that. But that's how many runs New Zealand made. Considering that he faced a third of the deliveries, New Zealand and Williamson actually made 22.2% of the runs required. Again, it's not particularly great. But let's just go away from the pie charts for 1 second. This is the strike rates today for this particular game. So Williamson, run rate required is the black one. So that's obviously the rate that, or basically the rate that England scored at. Williamson scored at a runner ball. So you can see him way down there. You can see the non-Williamsons, so that's the rest of the New Zealanders. You can see they were just behind the rate that England scored at. So they scored pretty much the same as England. And then you've got this teal one on the end. And yes, I have used every color of a one-day shirt that New Zealand's have. This is the sort of stuff I don't think I get enough credit for on this channel. But anyway, if you look at the teal one, that is what the New Zealand batters would have had to have struck at in order to have made up for Williamson's batting. It is what it is. He made the game a lot harder for everyone else. I don't think he was obviously doing it on purpose, but this is how it's ended up with. And so just to make it really clear, he was scoring at 1 run a ball, and the rest of New Zealand batters would have had to score at 1.75 runs a ball in order to win this game from the position that he kept them in. And so we're almost talking about making everyone else score double the rate that he did at that point. No one's trying to run a ball, and Williamson certainly would have backed himself to eventually bat long and make up for it at the end, the old catch-up innings. The problem with that is twofold. One, very rarely do you catch up in the way that you should, and you still chewed up a lot of balls to get there. And two, when you don't catch up, it's a disaster. And, this was a bit of a disaster. And the other question is whether he could have caught up at all. This is Kane Williamson by year. Strike rate by year, and you can see quite clearly that there is a dip in the last 2 years when it comes to his strike rate. He has had a couple of good years overall, but the last couple of years he certainly had a dip, and a lot of that is to do with the elbow injury. It could just be that he's getting on as well. To be fair, he was obviously never a power play ever, but he did have a couple of nice years, and then he really has struggled. He's barely above a run a ball so far this year. Last year he was at a strike rate of 119, so certainly he's had his problems there. More specifically, this is his run rate at the death. Because in order to play the catch-up innings, this is generally where players have to catch up. And you can see there are years where Kane Williamson has scored at over 2 runs a ball, and he generally scores at a strike rate at the death over 150. So he's not a huge striker. He's not like some of those players who are, well over 2 runs a ball or 2.5 runs a ball or anything like that. But he's a very good scorer at the death. Again, he's only faced 50 balls at the death this year, which is a little bit less than he has over his career. But it's still a fairly decent sample size. And you can see that he's striking at around 140, which is the lowest and really, all things considered, pretty much by far the lowest he's ever been. He's just not being able to catch up at the end, which means that if he does play these innings, I'm not sure what the payoff is going to be. Is it, he's going to be able to face 10 balls at the end and make 14 runs off them. So if you're scoring at a run a ball, that's not a big bump. And occasionally he will obviously go beyond that. He's still a very smart player and obviously a very skillful player. But that actual power, it does seem to have gone in that way. There's a really good tweet from James down here, which I should have done as well, but you can go find that on McLovin Stato's Twitter about the run rates when Phillips came in and when Phillips and when Williamson was dismissed. But essentially, the anchor position is a very complicated topic. I think there's no doubt that Williamson could have steadied the ship in a way that allowed the others to score big today. So, Williamson, if Phillips had played a similar innings that he did in the last game, it would have been completely different. And, if he made 50, if he made 100 off 50 odd balls, it would have been completely different. And 40 off 40 would have supplemented that quite well. That's why it is an interesting position. Also, just at that point, if he wasn't caught off that ball goes for a boundary. Maybe he gets a couple away. Maybe he had Williamson is a very smart batter when it comes to matchups. He finds a bowler that he usually thinks is the one that he wants to attack, like Mark Wood early on, and he goes after them. Not having Williamson at the crease when Mark Wood came back on also was a good matchup for England. These things all play a role. But I do wonder if he was ever going to be able to score a bunch of boundaries in a row to put any pressure back on England in this particular game. And maybe Mitchell would have played a similar innings. We saw him make 22 off 24 in the Sri Lanka game. The difference is that we know that Mitchell can hit a bunch of sixes still. He still has that within his wheelhouse. And if you look back to that game, Williamson scored 8 off 13. And against Australia, he was 23 from 23. So his current strike rate in this tournament is below a run a ball, which it also was in the IPL. And yet, with everything I have just said, he's still Kane Williamson. And this is England's reaction when they dismissed him. Play the video, please, Muku.
Goes, yes, gone. Williamson looking for the gap here.
So you can...
Trying to get that in the gap for a boundary. Picks the fielder out. Can't believe...
You can really see Ben Stokes' reaction. Now, it's a bowler taking a wicket, so in some cases, it's maybe something more to do with that. But that's not the reaction I had for England. My first reaction was, do you want him to go out now? Because I thought anyone else who could come in could have actually upped the rate. Now, that didn't happen. They had a bunch of failures after that. I think Neesham smashed his first ball for 4, got that 2, and then was out maybe the third or fourth ball he faced. No one else really got going at all. And Mitchell the same again. However, I'm not sure that if Williamson was there, he was going to really help New Zealand push forward. They were needing almost 2 runs a ball, and I don't see how he was ever going to be able to do that. As brilliant as he was, and him and Phillips were at stealing 2s and everything else. It's a real question for New Zealand going forward. And, this is a particular wicket that didn't help the anchors. I still think there will be wickets that they will need a Williamson knock coming forward. So it's a really complicated thing. But I'd say if he's going to score at less than a run a ball from here on in, he would want to fart rainbows as a captain in order to make this work for his team. All right, on to his bowlers, the Kiwi seam bowlers. This tournament, the power play has been all about wobble ball and swing. In fact, as I've discussed before, since Kookaburra changed the seam, almost all the seamers are massively more impactful at the top compared to what they were before in white ball cricket. And one team that seems to have affected more than most, if I can bring up this. And I can. New Zealand are averaging, this was before today, this year in the power play, they were averaging around 17 and a half, was it? Way below 20. They're still below 20 now, even with that game. I think they're just above 19. So they're still well below any other team on this list. And that is a remarkably low record for a lot of games that they have played so far. And it means if you're playing them, your middle order is just under more pressure than you would be in most situations. This particular wicket, though, was a little bit. It was a little bit different because it was that 3 times used wicket, so it wasn't fast like Perth, and it wasn't helpful the way that Hobart, Geelong, and Melbourne had been. It was different again to Sydney, and it didn't help the seamers as much. It was interesting that suddenly Bolt and Southey didn't look as good. It could have been also that England did quite well, but it was noticeable that they didn't have the same kind of impact. And if you want to see exactly what I'm saying, you can see that in the previous games, I think their economy is 4.2 runs and over in the first 2 games. And then tonight they were I think they were about 10.5 runs and over as a combined. So I think what this really shows is just how different each venue has been, even from game to game. And I actually talked to Bharat about this on our podcast, which will be up on YouTube soon, but you can find on the Red Inca feed. But Muku, if you could play Bharat's theory on this, please.
Hazelwood yesterday after the game, he mentioned it as well. I mean, you're talking about a very seasoned Australian fast bowler, about how all of them, him, Mitchell Starc and Pat Cummins, have gone from venue to venue and have had to kind of adjust to the difference in pitches. Even at the Gabba, I bumped into him just before he started his mix zone, and he was saying generally carries through a lot more. The game that they played against West Indies, the T20 before the World Cup began, he said it was carrying through a lot more like the Gabba, but this one wasn't, especially in the second innings. It wasn't going through like a proper Gabba wicket. So immediately they had to adjust. Like, you had to start bowling more cutters, and also the lengths that you had to bowl with your cutters changed. Literally after 2 or 3 balls into his spell, he had to change what he was doing or what he expected to do. Similarly, at Perth, the ball was flying all over the place. We saw what happened in India, South Africa, but I was there for Australia, Sri Lanka, where Matthew Wade was collecting balls. Like, you felt like we were back in the days of when Lillian Thompson used to bowl at the Wacker. So it really did feel like that.
I'm being told by Muku that Uncovered is actually already out. So after this podcast, you can go and listen. We'll go watch us chat and everything else. The only other thing I would say about New Zealand today is that England still got 180. But considering that the 2 bowlers who've been dominating for them both went for runs, I thought that was a pretty good sign for New Zealand, all things considered. And their attack actually pulled it back quite well. Now, part of that is just that they're smart bowlers and they can adjust to those conditions. But I think it wasn't the worst sign for New Zealand. You're not going to have the 2 opening bowlers go, what was it? 13 consecutive dot balls like Tim Southey had at one stage in this tournament. It was always going to be a little bit different. All right. What have we got here? Well, Afghanistan. So of all the teams affected by the rain, Afghanistan has been the wettest in this tournament. And it was a 10-day gap between getting out to play. Think about it from Afghanistan's point of view. They would probably be happy that they didn't have to re-qualify in that early part of the tournament, right? I think that was good news for them. But because of that, they actually haven't played as much good cricket as some of the other teams have. And, they don't play quite the same amount of cricket as some of the major nations do already. It would have been good for them to play in Australian conditions as much as possible. If they don't get anything out of this tournament, and 2 of their 5 games are rained out, and maybe even a third one is affected, it'd be a really, really big shame for them, I think, because it's also about them developing as a team. So they did get to play today, although that was about as good as it got for them. They never really got going in this match. Their top 4 all made starts, but never just can't bat at a pace that can really bother a team like Sri Lanka. And to be fair, Gurbar's hit some very nice boundaries at one stage, including a lovely 6 down over long on. They didn't use Mohammad Nami or Rashid Khan as pinch hitters. I was actually having a look at Rashid Khan's record the other day as not as a pinch hitter, but as a batter in T20. His numbers aren't far off what Sunil Narayan's are, and it's interesting that so many teams have used Sunil Narayan more than Rashid Khan does. I always thought Adil Rashid and Rashid Khan were very interesting prospects to bat in the power play because they hit the ball in weird areas. Rashid Khan's, once he gets going, it's annoying. Adil Rashid is a guy who's made 10 first-class hundreds. But again, with Afghanistan, I felt, and one of my things I would say, having watched them a lot over the years, is that they are very inflexible with their ideas. They're very dogmatic. So, the whole idea of Rashid Khan bowling in the second 10 overs no matter what, they've got slightly better at that. But a lot of, when it comes to the toss, when it comes to tactics, when it comes to defending, so quite often they'll be on top of the ball, but they'll still be defending. I do think they need... It's funny because Mohammad Nami is such a natural cricketer and such an interesting player, but even his captaincy sometimes, it's not like it's by numbers. It's just that they have a way that they want to play and they have no flexibility within that. Anyway, they didn't up the scoring rate, so they didn't make a lot of runs. And I would say that maybe the most notable thing for Afghanistan in their batting was the run out of Gulbuddin, who wasn't even supposed to be playing in this tournament. He's there because Zazai was injured and was sent home. So Gulbuddin slipped, wasn't going for a second run, and then he tragically fell over and rolled around for a little bit. It was absolutely hilarious action. And I would hate to just tell you about it when I can show you it, because it is really beautiful to watch.
Was not as high intensity as it is now, and that's where they've slowed down. Oh dear, they get a wicket.
No stage did he roll over the crease. Sent back by Nabi there. Slip, and now he's got to try and get in. He doesn't.
It's a game of roly-poly. I hope he's okay. He's holding that left shoulder, but he's well and truly out of his crease.
There's a few things I want to just briefly unpack about this. First is that, say what you want about Spider-Cam occasionally giving us dead balls and annoying batters and all those sorts of things and stopping play. Spider-Cam paid for itself this World Cup with this footage. But also, just how brilliant it is that at any stage, if he just rolled normally, if he'd managed to roll towards the crease, not side over side, he just would have been in. It's a beautiful run out. The only other thing I would add is it's his first game playing in Australia. He probably hasn't played a lot of games in the middle. It looks like he's got spikes on. He may not have full spikes. Australian pitches, I was saying this when the pitches were wet earlier in the tournament. Australian pitches are really slippy. It's very rare that you get Australian batters who don't bat in spikes, and that's because of the wickets in Australia. They're just so hard that you skid. Whether he's wearing... they look like full spikes to me, but it is hard to tell. He might have not the spikes, but the rubber bits in instead. But if he hasn't been practicing in Australian conditions and he hasn't been running, there's a very big chance that he would slip over. Anyway, it's not ideal when you're talking about this as the highlight of Afghanistan's innings, is it? With the ball, Afghanistan, they just didn't get much penetration outside of Mujib. This is a home game for him, Brisbane Heat guy. Rashid Khan bowled well as well. Faruqi was not too bad with the ball, but didn't get much reward there. I think maybe when Mujib struck early, Afghanistan had a little bit of optimism, but Sri Lanka were just chasing such a low target and they didn't have to take any risks. And there's also another bad sign for Afghanistan. You can see here that Rashid Khan injured himself in the field. I know that they were likening it to the Simon Jones injury, and it was off the second last ball of the game. injured his knee. Hopefully that's not anything in maybe just a mild sprain or, it just pinched for a moment. But it'd be a shame if they don't have Rashid Khan in Adelaide Oval. If as much as anything, just for the fans, that's his ground in Australia in the Big Bash. It's a big deal. I think for him to be able to play there for Afghanistan, and it would be a real shame, for the Adelaide fans who supported him, who probably want to come along and see him bowl, even if they still want Australia to win. Let's move on to Sri Lanka. They delivered perhaps their most polished performance of the tournament. Maybe the Irish game would be one of the other ones that was up there. Although they still dropped a couple of catches along the way. Afghanistan did have an okay power play, and their Sri Lankan bowlers pegged them back. That's kind of what you would expect with Sri Lanka not having their, A seamers available and still having their spinners there. I think it was important for Hasaranga to bowl well. It was a pitch that obviously favoured him a little bit more because it was worn, but he went for 3 for 13, and he also managed to get Rashid Khan, and he's probably going to be happy with that, right? Why would you not be? Sri Lanka could have been rattled early by the wicket of Nasanka again, but they didn't have any problems. DDS, the great Dhananjaya De Silva, looked fantastic. I think this is almost an ideal kind of innings for him. They're still batting him at number 3. I've said for a while, I think he's probably an opener, but we'll see how we go. It was really interesting watching him slog sweep Rashid Khan for 6. And he hit 54 off his last 29 balls. So he ended up with 66 from 42, but there was no real hurry in that particular innings at all. And Sri Lanka won fairly comfortably to keep their World Cup hopes and dreams alive for a little bit longer. They play England, don't they? So that's going to be a really, really interesting match. Is that at the SCG? I think it is. I've written all these things down on my board and I can't read my own writing, so sorry about that. But that's the end of the major part of the written part of World Cup mood board for today. We'll just have another brief break here, and I'll line up some of your questions and I'll answer them in the second part.
If you love the language of cricket and want more, then head over to the 99.94 app and you can hear all of our podcasts and cricket commentary. We're adding new shows all the time and covering cricket series from all over the world. Be the first to hear all of our announcements by following us on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation.
All right, let's get to your questions. All right. Kanyasani says, has Sam Curran always been a good death bowler? If not, how has he improved? No. Now, I looked this up the other day, so I don't have the full numbers in front of me. I think traditionally we look at the way he bowls and we think he probably should be better at the top, but he hasn't really ever had a great record either for Chennai or for Surrey at the top. I don't know if his record for England's been any different, but I've certainly checked out the other ones. He's really struggled to find a role that suits him as a bowler in T20 cricket, but he is a very clever cricketer and he does have a lot of skills. And I think that it wouldn't surprise me if he's gone off and just thought about his game a little bit more. But also England have been telling him that he's going to have to bowl without the new ball. So in some ways that, I don't want to say that frees him, but he doesn't have to just run in with the seam up anymore, right? Now he's thinking, okay, what am I going to do here? A bit like what I talked about with Mitchell Johnson as well. Mitchell Johnson, good podcaster, you should go listen. With Mitchell Starc, Sam Curran doesn't swing the ball as much as he used to because he's bowling a lot of wobble balls as well. So it could be that's also why they've moved him down. But I just think he's a very skillful, very clever player. He's never going to be maybe an elite bowler. But so far in this tournament, they've gotten away with it. Whether that will continue to happen, the whole Ben Stokes, Sam Curran, Chris Wokes thing, it looks, even Mark Wood, all of them have, you can see how it works at its absolute best. It's got a decently high ceiling, but not a massively high ceiling, but a very low basement. You can see how it can definitely fall apart. So I find it interesting from that. But yeah, I just think that Sam Curran is a smart player. And I think that in this new role, he's had to think about things. One thing I would say about Sam Curran is, having looked at his record over the years, despite the fact that he gets pigeonholed quite often as new ball bowler, even in red ball cricket, quite often isn't that kind of a bowler. And so perhaps that's when you allow his intelligence to come through a little bit more and he can play with his skills rather than just keep the seam up and see what happens. Happy says, which team do you think is completely balanced? No teams are completely balanced. I don't think there's a team at this World Cup that's completely balanced. Australia is short a bowler. South Africa is short batting. Pakistan doesn't have batting in the middle order. England, obviously, their bowling is not ideal. India's probably doesn't have enough power hitting, earlier on in the innings. Without Jadeja as well, they're probably not quite as balanced as they could be. And they don't have a death bowler. Sorry, they don't have a death. Yeah, they don't have Boomer. They don't have a death specialist, I suppose is the best way of putting that. Although Arshdeep is handy. Trying to think who else. Who have I missed? New Zealand. I wonder if for New Zealand to be really balanced, either Neesham needs to be bowling and he's not, or I wonder if Bracewell needs to come in and slightly strengthen that lineup a little bit. I think they're a very well balanced team as it stands. I'm trying to think of the full batting order. Even then, though, Santner has to bat at 7, doesn't he? So maybe if they had Bracewell at 7, Santner at 8, and then the 3 quicks behind them, they could be the best balanced team. But then I wonder, I mean, although Santner takes a lot of wickets, I wonder if they'd be a little bit worried that they don't have the ability to throw the ball to Sodhi. So do you see what I'm saying? It's it's not that easy. It's actually easier to balance a T20 franchise team than it is a T20 international team, because you have to take what you have. We did that chat with on Scotland cricket recently, about the fact that their 2 best spinners are both left-arm finger spinners. It's very different, but it's still not what you would want. You'd want if your 2 best spinners be completely different. Even if they both spin it in the same direction, you want one to be a finger spinner and one to be a wrist spinner. And in that particular case, they're both finger spinners, although Mark Watt's almost a different species on his own at this point. All right. Akum says, I like the idea of using Jordan as a permanent subfielder. I think T20 cricket would be better if we got to the point where that was something that we could do. Hayden Malks Jr. Should be playing for every team in the world. And there's a lot of very good players out there who could play as fielders. Obviously, we don't want everyone being a subfielder, but I do like the idea of substitutes in T20 cricket, of having, that you can pick from a team of 15 players. And I do like the idea of having maybe 2 or 3 substitute fielders as well, so that we have the best bowlers bowling to the best batters with the best fielders out there. I really like that idea. I'm not sure which league is going to do it first, but I would assume eventually someone might try it. But it is very... I just think that's a better way of playing. Maybe it's the more American style than the other style, which is, no, everyone's out there and they have to bat and they have to bowl and they have to field. But I do think the T20 is just a little bit... watching slow people not field particularly well, and watching number 11s bat and all those sorts of things, I could see an argument for, wouldn't it be great if everyone could bat and everyone could bowl and the best fielders fielded. But yeah, Chris Jordan's brilliant. Anyway, says, like Stokes and Cummins, one of the world-class around and the other world-class bowler with solid hitting, but neither is a good T20 player. Especially not Stokes. He shouldn't be in the World Cup. Well, they're both good T20 players. Like, I know we get a bit fascinated with the fact that they're not, like, absolutely dominating the way that we think they should, right? But even I think if you broke it down, Ben Stokes, let's have a look. International T20, not international, domestic T20. He hits at 25 with a strike rate of 135, and his T20 bowling, he averages 30 with an economy of 8.4, right? There's a lot of players around the world that are probably getting paid a lot of money for that. And if you go to Pat Cummins, let's have a look at his T20 record around the world. Oops. And I've said before that I think there should be more players like Pat Cummins and Ben Stokes coming through. that are absolutely brilliant, but don't have the time to actually play all three or specialize in all three formats. And so it does affect their numbers overall. Just having a look. So, sorry, the full page won't load for some reason, but maybe because I'm not streaming. Oh, no, here we go. Pat Cummins in T20 cricket goes to 8 runs and over while averaging 26. Pretty solid numbers. His economy could be better and should be better, but and bats averaging 17 and strikes 138. Again, even without them being as good as we think they should be, those are still fantastic players. What would they be like if they were specializing in the format in the way that, I don't know, Karen Pollard or Obid McCoy or Ben Cutting, those sorts of players have, right? And you know, I remember I might have talked about this with Harry Gurney once a while back. I'll try and get him on a podcast actually shortly. But there's no doubt that when you do start to specialize in just that one thing, it's a huge advantage. And you know, Ben Stokes hasn't really found his best role because he hasn't played enough T20 cricket. And then when he did, played a little for England, then he went out and played an IPL season. Then he change franchises, I think, there as well. You know, all these different things have happened. And Pat Cummins, you know, I thought Pat Cummins was going along to be a very similar bowler to Lockie Ferguson. And then he didn't play for a couple of years. And since he's come back, I'm not sure where Pat Cummins is best used. And sometimes when I'm watching him bowl, I think, what's he actually going to... What's his plan here? Whereas if you look at Lockie Ferguson, if you know, you look at some of the other more T20 specialist bowlers, you're like, wow, they, you know, Tamal Mills, you know exactly what they're going to do. It may not work, but you know what they're going to do. And sometimes I'm looking at Pat Cummins and I am thinking to myself, does he know exactly what he's going to do here? And he's a smart, talented cricketer, but there's no doubt that there's a huge advantage to a lot of players now who are out there playing much more cricket than others are. One format of cricket. Sean says, where is the metric which measures fielders' contributions gone? CricViz are working with the ICC, so Sunset Vine and the ICC would have it, so they could use it. But yeah, no, he would be a positive one over and over again. I'm not sure why it's not being used. They also, I do feel that they've got some spatial tracking cameras up at some of these grounds. They could actually track the fielding even more advanced. So I don't know if maybe they were thinking about doing something like that as well. I would have loved some spatial tracking on that one that was hit to square leg when no one moved. That would have been fun. Kartik says, is Kane still struggling with his elbow? I can only assume that he is. I don't think it's not like he gives us constant updates, and he's talked about having to manage it. It feels like it's one of those chronic injuries now, a little bit like, you know, Michael Atherton or Michael Clark's back, or Steve Waugh's hamstring, or whatever that may be, where he's just going to either have to be able to play with it or he's not going to be able to play with it. And, you know, perhaps he wakes up one day and he's just like, what's the point? But yes, as far as I'm aware, it certainly seems to be hampering him, from what I can tell. Nikon says, do you think a lot of the early upset results were because teams didn't have enough data? No, because a lot of those teams played in the last World Cup. Most of the international teams, even at that level, there's plenty of video of. There's certainly quite a bit of data on. There should be a lot of information. Whether teams take them as seriously, I don't know. But are we really saying that Ireland didn't know anything about... England didn't know anything about Ireland? Zimbabwe have played quite a few of those teams before, that they have had success with. Zimbabwe played Pakistan at home, and did they go to Pakistan as well at one stage? They may have as well. Namibia made the second round of the last World Cup, so no, I don't think that's necessarily why it happened. Jay says, thoughts on Peter Delapena's new Twitter project to catch non-strikers backing up early? Well, it's not a new Twitter project. I mean, he's been doing this for 5 years, maybe longer. And he's right. Don't leave the crease. And it's a remarkably weird thing. I mean, there's other things in sports that are similar, and people don't do them for many different reasons. One of the big ones is that there was we don't know who the player is, but there was an NBA player who was struggling with free throws, and another NBA player who had a very good free throw percentage by doing the underhand bucket shot. Rick Barry. I think it was Rick Barry. I hope I'm getting the names right. But this other guy said to him, what should I do? And Rick Barry's just like, just do the underhand bucket shot. And apparently he did it a couple of times and people made fun of him. He never did it again. People in sports sometimes do things that they shouldn't do, or won't do things that they should do based on perceptions and how it's handled. And I've certainly talked to a lot of players who've done things that, like Mancads, I don't think any Mancads specifically, but where they just like, it's not worth the hassle, right? But what Peter is showing is that batters take a head start. And it's, me and PDP have been talking about it for years. We're both more than aware of it. I've done it in, many cricket games myself. You don't want to get run out, stay in your crease. And I think we need to get more and more to that kind of thinking. But yeah, with PDP, it's certainly not new. He's maybe got more followers now. I think after the, I haven't looked at his follower account, but after the thread that he did on the last one, was it the women? It might have been the women's game one. He got a lot of new followers, I think, especially from India, where it isn't frowned upon as much as it is in England. And I think more people notice it. But yeah, PDP's been talking about this for as long as I can remember. And PDP's like a dog with a bone with something like that. He's not going to let this go. He's not a dog, by the way. Also, he's got a YouTube channel. Go check him out. Nikon says, who between Wood and Nokia is a more frightening prospect? I think that there's something about the energy that Wood gets off the crease, off the pitch, that I find really interesting. I don't know if it's because he's shorter or something to do with his release, but he seems to get this weird energy off his short balls, whereas Nokia, his balls almost seem to hone in. So I think from a physical safety point of view, I would have thought that Wood maybe can surprise you with more balls that might hit you. I think Nokia is probably more consistently quick. If you threw a ball to both of them in a park, I kind of feel like Nokia would bowl the quicker ball straight away, whereas Wood would have to get ready and do everything else. And also there's a lot of energy and extra effort that seems to come with each Wood delivery, whereas I think Nokia can be fast even when he's holding himself back a little bit. But it really probably depends. I might be right about the way the ball comes off the pitch with the two of them, but if it's not that, the other thing that would depend is how you see them. So a lot of batters had problems with Sean Tate, not just because of the excess pace, but because he had this sort of load up where his arm would come from behind his body. And Shoaib Akhtar had a different kind of action as well. People didn't have as much problem with Alan Donald and Brett Lee, right? Because they had perfect actions. And you see that with Chris Wokes. Chris Wokes, for a long time, was bowling 90 miles an hour. And no one was, that worried about his pace. And part of the reason was he showed you the ball the whole way through. It was a very classical action. Everyone understood it. Whereas you can bowl 5 miles, 10 miles slower an hour, but have a very weird action and you can take people by surprise. And so I would say that of the two of them, maybe Nokia has the maybe slightly more classical action, but he also has a lot more skills than Wood. So, that because he has a more classical action. C Square says, I see on Twitter that's hailing in Adelaide. Considering tomorrow's games are scheduled, there will be an effect will there be effect on the games there? Could mean the end to Zimbabwe semi-final hopes. It could be. Australian grounds dry very quickly. The problem in this tournament has been that it hasn't stopped raining, but Australian grounds do dry very quickly. And one of the reasons they dry very quickly is quite often they're sand-based. I can't remember how sand-based Adelaide Oval is, but you're more worried about rain scheduled during the game at somewhere like Australia, whereas maybe in some other venues you're worried more about the rain beforehand. Not to say that some of these some of these games, there's been so much rain that it hasn't drained off. But they do generally drain quite quickly because of the sand. Harsha says, where do you think Harry Brooks should bat, ideally? Personally, I think he's a great talent that's being wasted down the order. I mean, the thing is, you could say that about everyone, Harsha. Like, almost everyone is better when you put them up at the top of the order. I think they see him as a guy batting from overs 10 to 20 for them. that's a very important role. He's kind of filling the old Jos Buttler role. With him and Liam Livingstone there, I think they've got two different versions of that available to them. But I also think that, let's say, I know Buttler, Hales, and Milan go out early on. Harry Brook is a proper batter and obviously will be a test batter. They have the ability to then push him up the order. So I think if they're losing early wickets, you can put him up the order. And if you're not losing early wickets, you can probably keep him for that back half. He probably, let's see how he continues to develop. Very good chance he might just end up being a number 3 anyway. And so he'll go up the order. That's kind of what happened. If you're that good, and as good as he looks like he is, over a period of time, unless you are flawed against the new ball, you eventually end up at the top of the order. Dibad says, how is Australia complaining about the schedules and adjusting to pitches? Well, they're not complaining about them. They're explaining what's happening in this tournament. I don't think they're complaining about them at all. I think what they were saying is that no one expected this tournament to be a situation where you would turn up. You playing in Australia, you kind of expected the same kind of pitches all the way through with slight variations, especially more so now in this sort of drop-in era. And that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing wildly different pitches from ground to ground at the moment. And I think the Australians were surprised at how that pitch played at the Gabba yesterday. But again, I don't think they would have played a lot of early season white ball games at the Gabba internationally. But it was a weird deck. It didn't act the way that a Gabba deck would act. You've got Perth in the middle, which is like a trampoline, tennis ball bounce that we're not used to really. We get a lot of bounce in Western Australia, but it's usually a bit more even. So it's almost like the Perth Stadium is like a combination between the WACA and the old MCG tennis ball grounds. I do think that it is really interesting. And if the Australian players are commenting on it, Dibad, that kind of tells you why this is a really tough tournament for anyone, for batting and bowling at times. You're going to get more out of it if you're bowling, so you're not going to complain too much, but you're going to have to really change what you do from game to game. Have a look at Ngidi of just like not bowling any slower balls at Perth Stadium. So I think it's really interesting, and you can see why people are looking at that. And we want the players to be honest, don't we? If they're saying that, the Australians are saying, look, the wickets are weird for us, that's kind of telling us that it's the case for everyone. Nikon says, do you think wrist spin will play a role later in the tournament? Well, the Gabba certainly spun. That's one of the hotter venues. We've got Adelaide Oval next, so we'll see a little bit there. SCG, I don't think we've seen a lot helping there. We're not going to get enough sun that it's suddenly going to be normal Australian wrist spin wickets, but you might get a little bit more assistance as the tournament goes on. But how much, I don't specifically know. Oh, out of all the ones I favorited, I'll just see if there's anyone else. HSP says, who's been your favorite player of the tournament so far? Sikandar Raza. I've been a fan of his for a long time. The way he's come together as a batter and then developed as this new style of bowling, just fascinated. Just endlessly fascinated by him. I love the way he plays. I love his energy. I love the way he thinks about cricket. You're talking about a player who is, in terms of the years he's in, well past his peak, and yet he's absolutely found his peak right now. I do wonder what he could have developed as outside of the Zimbabwean system if he wasn't stuck in that system when they had so many troubles. It tells you how talented he is to be able to come out. So I think he's been my favorite player so far. I'd love to see him get, one more really good knock. I don't think we've seen him make any runs really since the early round. I'd like to see him make runs maybe one more time. But I thought his bowling against Pakistan was outstanding. Let's just see who else we've got. So Raj says, you've said this tournament doesn't necessarily determine the best team. It certainly doesn't determine the best team. Do you think it makes sense if they have a qualifier and an eliminator instead of semifinals? Yeah, in a game as random as T20, and it's for cricket, it's quite random. I think it's got a fairly high randomness compared to most professional sports. Because of the impact of what a drop catch can have, one innings can have, maybe even one small mini spell can have. I think because of that, you certainly get the you certainly get more randomness to it. So having knockouts doesn't make sense to me. I think it should be 1 versus 2 and 3 versus 4. I would assume the only reason they haven't done that is because it's not sort of a natural thing to have at World Cup events. But it's what the IPL has it for the similar kind of reason, right? And if you end up as the best team in your group, I think you should get a bonus going ahead, especially a team like Pakistan who was undefeated. I think that's right. I have to go and check my numbers. But in the last tournament, and they play a semi-final and they get knocked out straight away. It just seems a bit pointless is the wrong way, but it's I think having those preliminary finals is the term that is invented in it, and that style of final was invented in Australia. I don't know if it was Melbourne or Sydney, either AFL or rugby. I don't know who came up with it first, but whoever came up with it, that particular system is a much better system than a straight knockout, I think, at that point. If you want the best team to win. Is that what the World Cup's about? I don't know. Sathan says, Sahan says, New Zealand is the only team who doesn't need other results to go their way in Group 1. Is that right? Sorry, I didn't get a chance to look at the points table just before. I will... it's just because we're so busy putting the show together. I think you're right. I think that is the case. I think they control their destiny more than anyone else, and they are playing. Who have they got? Ireland. So I think you might be right there. But yeah, I haven't done the deep dive. The problem with doing this show is that the games finish and then straight away we go live as quickly as we can, and then obviously the points tables. I would have to spend so much time looking, but you could be right. John Boy Media. Oh, well, the baseballers are in the house. For people awful at math, is there a website that generates the results needed to get the desired net run rate? So I have found them before online, John Boy, but I'll let you know that the ones that I saw weren't completely accurate. And when I worked as an analyst for cricket teams, I had to work it out manually myself. If anyone else knows of a website that they trust when it comes to net run rates, please put them below. But I could never find one that was completely accurate. There was an old blogger who used to do it. It's the same with Duckworth-Lewis. The actual Duckworth-Lewis system that I have on my computer is like a package that you have to run every time. And I don't believe there's anything that is naturally updated online, which just seems like a missed opportunity. Another way that we're behind baseball, John Boy. There you go. Let's see who else we've got here. Harsha says, Santner seems to have a very good record against left-handers. Did New Zealand miss a trick not bowling him earlier? Did New Zealand miss a trick bowling him early up against Buttler and Hales? No, I think he should have got Buttler out, right? And you have two right-handers. So he's got a really interesting record, Santner, when you look at him versus left-handers and right-handers. He takes left-handers more often, but he has a better economy rate against right-handers. And I think at that stage, with Hales and Buttler there, they also thought that one of those might go for him, which I suppose they did. So from a matchup perspective, I can kind of understand why they went in that particular direction. But yeah, it's a really good question. I like the fact that they do use him at all against left-handers, whereas obviously that hasn't always been the case. I think it's taken them a long time to sort of win up to that sort of thing. Greenie, when you say that England, Australia turned up with the wrong teams for the tournament, what do you mean? So we came to this tournament, I think anyone who'd done the numbers thought that there were slightly more wickets that happened in Australia than in some of the other major T20 countries. So we knew that wickets would happen regularly, but we also thought that this would be a 160 par type of tournament. It hasn't really been that at the moment. You would say that par's closer to 150 probably. So it's and the bowlers are dominating in the power play. Seam bowlers are completely dominating. And what you need for that, of course, is more highly skilled top order batters who can handle the ball nipping around. And what Australia and England have been doing, not wrongly either, not wrongly at all, is the last couple of years they've been trying. Well, England are massively ahead of everyone else of trying to get, and you put West Indies in this as well. England, India, and West Indies. England, Australia, and the West Indies have been trying to move towards having a bunch of guys who can come in and smash 25 off 10, right? And that you put your innings together in a completely different way. On normal Australian pitches, I don't think that would be terrible. There are flaws with it because the grounds are a little bit bigger than other places, so it's harder to hit sixes over the top of everyone's head. But I do think that there's a problem with it specifically here because the white balls have been changed and they're nipping around more, and also because these wickets have not been prepared as well because it's early in the Australian summer, and because some of them are just not behaving as you would hope they would behave for white ball cricket in the middle of January and February. We have this situation where the bowlers are a little bit more on top, and what you need is that slightly higher skilled batter available to you. So if you look at the Gabba game that we just had, England, New Zealand, that's actually probably more a traditional kind of T20 game, not weirdly a traditional Gabba pitch, but a more traditional kind of game where the new ball didn't dominate. The batters who were at their best were the ones who could muscle the ball away, all those sorts of things. That's what that's what teams like England and West Indies and Australia have been pushing themselves towards. And of course, then on the other side of this, what do you actually have? You have this ridiculous situation where the where the pitches aren't ready, the balls are nipping around everywhere. Suddenly some teams thinking they don't even need their spinners anymore. So it's just a different tournament than what we thought it was going to be. And I think the teams that probably invested more in that hitting style, they might still come out on top because Australia, well, one of them is going to qualify, you would think. And so they might still be fine, but that actual style of coming out and smashing it and scoring an extra 10 or 15 runs more than the opposition, relying on your bowlers not getting completely hammered, all those sorts of things, isn't the tournament we've seen. This is a tournament where bowling with the new ball, with high quality seamers against batters is who are struggling against it, is what we've seen so far. Let me just see if there's anything else here. Rama says, what do you think of a 5-run penalty for leaving the crease before the ball is released from the bowler's hand? I think it should be run out if you're out of the crease, like you are in every other point of the game. Let's see if I have anyone else here. Jay says, do you think David Miller has improved his game on another level? I've noticed he's changed it to the last World Cup. I think it started before then. I can't remember when, but I certainly did something on David Miller at one stage on how he has changed against spin specifically. I think it's the sweep shot. But yeah, look, he's finally the David Miller that we were promised. When he came through, there was it was AB de Villiers in him, and he never quite did that. And the games when you see him being brilliant, you do think to yourself, well, how is he not that player? But I think he's worked on his game a little bit. I think he was he stuck on a bench perhaps in the IPL, or maybe he missed out on some auctions. I can't remember the full story, but his dad's talked about it before, and I've certainly mentioned it in one of my IPL shows, but I don't think I've ever done a specialty thing on it. I would like to say I'd be able to do something on it before the finals. Checks the date of the finals. I've got a couple of other videos. I've got a video on Pakistan I want to do, and perhaps one on Nokia and Wood as well that I'd like to do as well. But yeah, I think Miller has blossomed as a player. I find it really interesting that something has certainly changed within his game technically and his mindset. I'll just finish up with a couple more here. Sri Lanka. Why has Sri Lanka really did in Cup? Well, this is a seam bowling World Cup, and all the seam bowlers are injured. The spinners haven't been able to, obviously at Perth they couldn't quite get the same kind of impact that you would want them to have. I just think this is also a World Cup where you really want your top order to be slightly stronger than what theirs is. I like potentially Dhananjaya De Silva and Kusal Mendes opening the batting, but Nissanka hasn't worked. I can see why he's there, but it's not working so far. But I just think that their strength is probably a couple of guys sort of in that middle sort of, that Rajapaksa type area. And this isn't a World Cup for that kind of batting either. And they also don't have a great. So we've seen some teams sort of struggle along and then just go ballistic at the end. I'm not sure that is Sri Lanka's best way of going. In fact, if you look at a lot of their success has been when their openers have got them off to a really good start. And this is not a tournament where anyone's openers are getting off to a really good start. Jark says, opinions on Brevis's 162. I haven't seen the highlights yet. I was working when it happened yesterday, and I'll have a look at it. But it sounds fun. And didn't he take a weird wicket or take a weird catch or something as well? Something else happened in that game. It seems like he had a great time. And I'll just go for... let's see if there's anything else here. Yeah. Molly-O, last one. Do you think England are using Milan in the correct way? Yeah, I think that's the perfect way to use him today. I don't, they had so many other options. I mean, in some ways, all the other options didn't make any runs. So if Milan had come in, maybe that doesn't change either. But yeah, it's definitely worth doing that. I think it's. I think if he's not going to bat at the top, you move him down. I just want to say, just on, thanks for everyone for the questions today. We'll play something for you in a moment. We've got the trailer or a clip from Borough and Mitch Johnson's new podcast out. But just on John Boy Media and John Boy himself, I think it's really interesting now that we've started to see that sort of level of American interest in cricket. Obviously, we've got the Major League Cricket coming about. John Boy's done some videos on that. He's done a video on this World Cup as well. I think the India-Pakistan game. He's done some stuff in other places. We're also starting to see ESPN Daily ask me on to do that big thing on the fake IPL league. And I'm starting to get more and more questions from some of the baseball writers, even occasionally from some of the basketball writers in America. Really interesting that whole thing is going. So if you can support John Boy's cricket, not that he needs any support, he's probably got 100 million more followers than I do, but if you can support his cricket stuff, I think it's a really interesting thing for people to be able to go out there and do. But I think you should also support all the things we do at 99.94, like the new Mitch Johnson podcast.
Never stuck your tongue out. I read that you were a Pete Sampras fan, but you should have paid an ode to him in some form or the other, but maybe at least when you were batting.
Well, I sort of did when I was batting, I guess. I had the single... Well, when I played tennis, I had the single-hand backhand like him and the serve. Like, I used to sort of do that little thing at the start. So, I didn't have the mini afro like him. He had like a little mini afro. I had the sort of the straight floppy hair. Very different in that way, but now, I know where I'm going with that.
Yeah, that's good.
That's Mitch Johnson talking about his hero being Pete Sampras as a kid. I also used to be a tennis player when I was a kid, and I had the exact same Pete Sampras. I don't know what you would call it. It's like a pre-routine to your serve, but it was very important to me psychologically, even if it didn't make any sense. We've obviously got really good content. England, India, South Africa, Australia podcasts, I think, have all been done recently. There's been a couple of West Indies. So check them all out on 99.94. But thanks for coming. We'll be here again tomorrow for another show. And certainly there's keep an eye out for a couple of other videos. I think we also have our uncovered video that we played a clip from before. So me and Bharat have done a podcast as well. But keep supporting us at 99.94 and we'll be here till the end of the tournament. See you then.